Welcome to the Roy Morgan Weekly Update. My name is Julian McCrann, manager of the Morgan Poll and the ABIX Roy Morgan Daily News Service, and I am in this week for Roy Morgan CEO Michelle Levine, who is unavailable but will be back next week. This week we have new research into the upcoming Victorian election, which is in about 10 days, and how Victorian voters are feeling as voting gets underway. Voting started this week. Australian unemployment figures for October, as well as the latest key weekly indicators of voting intention nationally, government confidence, consumer confidence, and inflation expectations. So firstly, a look at the key weekly indicators shows some positive news, but the headline voting results are unchanged from a week ago, with the Albanese government on 53.5%, ahead of the coalition on 46.5% on a two-party preferred basis, so unchanged on that front. In contrast to a week ago though, both of the key measures of confidence increased this week. Government confidence was up 5 points to 101.5 and back marginally in positive territory above the neutral level of 100. And that means more people say the country is going in the right direction than the wrong direction. So while the key measure of ANZ Roy Morgan consumer confidence was up for the first time since late September, up by 2.1 points to 80.8, that is still low. Every week, Roy Morgan also asks Australians what they expect annual inflation will be across the next 2 years, and unsurprisingly, inflation expectations have been soaring this year, as you can see in that chart. Last week, inflation expectations hit a record high of 6.8%, but the measure was down this week slightly by 0.3 percentage points to 6.5%, and that's the first decrease since mid-October, about a month ago. The next slide here looks at Roy Morgan monthly unemployment compared to the ABS figures over the last 20 years. The latest Roy Morgan unemployment estimate that we released this week for October shows unemployment jumping 1.1 percentage points to 9.2% of the workforce in October, and that's as the final COVID-19 restrictions came to an end. That's equivalent to 1.36 million people unemployed. As we have pointed out in our unemployment press release, which you can access on our website, the end of COVID-19 restrictions in mid-October means businesses no longer have to lure extra workers or hire extra workers as cover for people who are forced to undertake mandatory periods of isolation during the pandemic. That's all ended now. So the end of those COVID-19 restrictions means the unemployment figures for this month, November 2022, will be released in about a month, and they'll be the first since February 2020 that do not include a significant COVID-19 impact in a direct sense, because there won't be any restrictions in those figures. Over the last 2.5 years, the restrictions have had many impacts on the labour force, and they continue to play out. And that is, as we said, hiring extra workers to fill gaps created by people taking time off work to deal with sickness due to COVID-19. Even the ABS figures have consistently shown far higher rates of sickness and illness, heavily impacting the labour force throughout this year, more so than in previous years. So as well as a high unemployment, the total unemployment and underemployment was up 1.2 percentage points to 19.7% of the workforce in October. That's an estimated 1.5 million Australians underemployed in October, 10.5% of the workforce, and a total of 2.9 million Australians either unemployed or underemployed, so a very high number. And almost 1 in 5 Australians in the workforce were either looking for a job, unemployed, or wanting to work more hours, underemployed. Going forward, as we said, the ending of COVID-19 restrictions should ease these hiring pressures to some degree, although there are newer challenges such as inflation, rising interest rates, and now we have more supply chain issues caused by extreme weather events in much of Australia. Lots of floods in Victorian, New South Wales in the last few weeks, and all those issues are set to play an increasing role in the labour market as we head into the new year. And now turning to Victoria, which the state that faces an election later this month. A special Roy Morgan SMS poll conducted last week showed the ALP government of Daniel Andrews enjoying a large two-party preferred lead after the first 2 weeks of the official campaign. The ALP is on 57%, and that's a clear election winning position ahead of the coalition on 43% on a two-party preferred basis, although support for the ALP is down 3.5 percentage points since October. And we can see on this longer-term chart here, although the ALP support dropped in early November, the current two-party preferred result is very similar to the last Victorian election in 2018. At that state election, the ALP won 57.3% of the vote on a two-party preferred basis, and they secured a record election victory with the coalition on only 42.7%. So a look at these trends since then shows the ALP further ahead during much of the intervening period during the pandemic, during 2020, 2021 and 2022, earlier this year. But the latest poll shows we could be looking at a very similar result to last time at the end of the month. The biggest danger for both major parties may be losing seats to minor parties and independents, such as the Greens, so-called teal independents and other minor parties. The Victorian upper house is especially likely to elect a variety of minor parties due to the way the group voting tickets operate. At the last state election in 2018, there were a record of 11 minor parties elected to the Victorian upper house. Group voting tickets were formerly used in the Australian Senate elections but were done away with after the electoral reforms passed by the Turnbull government in 2016. Victoria is the only state to still use them. And looking at the two leaders now, a direct comparison shows Premier Daniel Andrews has nearly a 2-to-1 advantage over opposition leader Matthew Guy. Nearly 2/3 of Victorians, 65.5%, say Daniel Andrews is the better Premier compared to only 34.5% who say Matthew Guy. These results are virtually unchanged since mid-August over the last 3 months. When it comes to Premier Daniel Andrews' personal approval though, the results are not quite as positive, although far more Victorians approve of the Premier's job performance than disapprove. Now 58.5% of Victorian electors, that's down 4 percentage points since October, approve of Premier Daniel Andrews' job performance compared to only 42.5%, which is up 4 percentage points, who disapprove. So that's a net rating of plus 16. And over the next 2 weeks, Victorians are set to finish voting by Saturday, November 26, just over 10 days from now. Voting started yesterday on Monday. Roy Morgan CEO Michelle Levine will be back on deck for next week's Roy Morgan Weekly Update, and there will be a special Roy Morgan webinar to look forward to, looking at the Victorian election, including the two leaders, Premier Daniel Andrews and opposition leader Matthew Guy, and their respective political parties. The question of trust and distrust is crucial to the chances for both political leaders in the Victorian election, and we look at why do Victorians trust or distrust Daniel Andrews or Matthew Guy, also their political parties, and these issues will play a big role in the final result of this month's Victorian election. See the notes below this video to sign up for next week's Victorian election webinar, and next week we'll look forward to bringing you all the latest results for consumer confidence, inflation expectations and national voting intentions as well. So I encourage everyone watching to subscribe now for free to our Roy Morgan YouTube channel for all the latest political, economic and market research data and insights. Take care and we'll see you next week.